My name is George Harris. I am 62 years old, and I thought the hardest thing I would ever face was losing my wife, Linda. But after her passing, the silence in my home was slowly replaced by voices of concern that felt just a little too insistent. My son called every day, my daughter-in-law dropped by often, and their words of comfort soon turned into suggestions about my future, about moving, about what should happen with my money. At first, I wanted to believe it was love. But then, I started to notice the way Jessica's eyes lingered when I mentioned finances, the way she spoke of family, like she was already making decisions without me. And when New Year's Eve came, the truth she revealed shattered everything I thought I knew. What if the people sitting across your dinner table were quietly planning to take the very home you built your life around? Stay with me, because once you hear what I discovered, you will never forget it. I still remember the quiet in the house after Linda passed, the way every sound seemed to echo against the walls that once carried her laughter. She had been gone for almost a year, taken by cancer after 35 years of marriage, and I was left in Maplewood, Ohio, rattling around in a place that suddenly felt too large. The bed was too big, the dinners were too quiet, the mornings were too still. I told myself I was managing, but deep down, I knew I was drifting through the days, surviving out of habit rather than purpose. David, my son, was the first to notice, or maybe he was just the first to say it out loud. He started calling more often, asking if I had eaten, if I was keeping busy. Jessica, his wife, visited with the baby in her arms, her voice soft with concern, her eyes full of something I wanted to believe was kindness. They insisted they were worried about me being alone. I wanted to believe that too. It was early winter when David came by one Sunday afternoon. I was sitting in the living room with the TV on, but not really watching. He dropped onto the chair across from me, rubbing his hands together like he was working up to something. "Dad," he said, "you cannot stay here forever. This house is too big, too full of memories. You need a fresh start." I looked around at the family pictures, the holiday decorations still in the box by the hallway, and felt the sting of truth in his words. Maybe he was right. Still, the way he said it, like he had rehearsed the line, put me on edge. I managed to smile and told him I would think about it. A week later, Jessica came by with little Emma. She set the baby down with her toys and sat close to me on the couch. Her tone was gentle, the way a nurse might speak to a patient. "George," she said, "Robert would want you to move forward. He would want you to find happiness again. This house must feel like a trap." I nodded, though a part of me resisted. Linda and I had built a life here. Every corner told a story. But Jessica pressed on, almost too eagerly. "Real estate is always a smart choice. If you invested in something new, it would give you security and purpose." Her words lingered long after she left. I walked through the empty kitchen that night, the lights humming overhead, and wondered if maybe they were right. Still, there was a flicker of unease in my chest, something I could not name. Winter settled harder as December moved along. I spent my evenings sitting by the window, watching the neighbors put up lights, families gathering with laughter spilling out of their doors. The contrast to my silence was sharp. I thought of Linda, how she loved Christmas, how she would have insisted on a tree no matter how tired she felt. Without her, even the idea of decorating felt hollow. David kept calling, sometimes twice a day. "Dad, you cannot eat soup out of a can every night. You need people around you." Jessica would chime in during visits, her hand brushing mine in a show of comfort, but her eyes calculating in a way I tried to ignore. One evening after dinner, I caught my reflection in the dark kitchen window. I looked older than 62, the lines on my face deeper, the eyes more tired. I wondered if David was right, if I was fading in this house, holding on to memories that were weighing me down. Still, there was something about the way he kept pushing the urgency in his voice that made me wary. It did not sound like a son worried about his father. It sounded like someone with a plan. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I remembered Linda's last words to me. Do not let grief make you blind, George. Live, but live smart. I had not thought much about it then, too consumed with the idea of losing her. Now those words returned steady and clear. The next morning, David stopped by with coffee. He sat at the kitchen table looking around like he was already imagining it empty. Dad, he said, maybe you could think about selling. You would not have to live with all these ghosts. He gestured around the room, as if my life with Linda was nothing but clutter. I felt a spark of anger, then quickly buried. Instead, I sipped my coffee and said I would think about it. He smiled, relieved, and I wondered if I had just opened a door I would regret. That night, the house felt colder, the silence heavier. I lay awake listening to the wind against the windows, thinking about David's words, about Jessica's soft encouragements. For the first time, I admitted to myself that maybe my grief was making me vulnerable. Maybe, just maybe, they were not just trying to help. And as the clock ticked toward midnight, I sat alone in the dark living room, the glow of the street lamp spilling through the curtains, and I felt the weight of something shifting inside me. Something was coming, and I was not sure if I was ready for it. The following week, David showed up again, this time with Jessica and little Emma bundled in her carrier. The air was sharp with December cold, and when they came inside, the warmth of the house felt almost too bright. Jessica set the baby down on a blanket in the living room and looked at me with that same soft expression she always wore, like she was about to deliver bad news gently. Dad, David started, you have been doing so well on your own, but we think you deserve more than just getting by. You should be happy again. He glanced at Jessica as if waiting for her to pick up the thread. She leaned forward on the couch, her voice smooth. George, this house is filled with memories, but sometimes memories keep us stuck. Linda would not want that for you. I shifted in my chair, letting her words hang in the air. It was not the first time she had said something like that. But this time there was more urgency in her tone, like she had been practicing it. David continued. You always told me real estate was the safest investment. Maybe it is time to think about a new place. Something smaller, easier to manage. Somewhere you can start fresh. I nodded slowly, though my stomach tightened. They were not wrong. The house was big and lonely, but the way they pressed the point unsettled me. I looked at Emma gurgling on the floor, completely innocent, and wondered what Linda would have said if she had heard this conversation. After dinner, Jessica walked into the kitchen with me while David stayed behind, playing with the baby. She lowered her voice, almost conspiratorial. George, real estate is a way to secure the future. If you invested in a new house, you would have something solid to pass on. It would be a true legacy, not just money that slips away. Her eyes shone with enthusiasm, and for a moment I wanted to believe she was thinking of me, of keeping Linda's memory alive through something lasting. But another part of me caught the edge in her smile, the way her hand lingered on the countertop, like she was already imagining it in her own kitchen. I thanked her, pretending to consider it, and changed the subject. Still that night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed listening to the wind rattle the branches outside, hearing her voice in my head. Secure the future. Legacy. They were good words, comforting words, but they did not feel like they belonged to me. A few days later, David called again. His voice was bright, almost forced. Dad, I was talking to Jessica, and we think it might be nice if you spent New Year's with us. We could all go look at some neighborhoods together, see what is out there. I hesitated, staring at the empty living room around me. The thought of leaving this house made my chest tighten, but the idea of sitting here alone on New Year's Eve was even worse. I agreed, and he sounded relieved, maybe too relieved. That weekend, they came by again. Jessica carried a stack of real estate magazines, flipping through pages as she talked. Look at this. 1 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, perfect for family gatherings. Imagine holiday dinners, Emma running around the yard. David chimed in. Mom always dreamed of a big porch, remember? He pointed to a photo. This one even has a porch swing. You could sip your coffee out there every morning. I smiled politely, but the images felt foreign. I could not imagine myself in those glossy pictures, not without Linda beside me. I excused myself to the kitchen, listening as their voices carried on excitedly in the living room. Later that evening, Jessica joined me again, while David changed Emma's diaper. She lowered her voice, her words deliberate. "George, you know real estate never loses value. If you put your insurance money into the right property, it would grow. And we would all feel more settled like a true family again." I studied her face, the perfectly arched brows, the practiced smile. She looked so sincere, and maybe she believed she was. But something in me stirred uneasily. It felt less like an invitation and more like a pitch. When they left that night, I stood at the doorway watching their car disappear into the dark street. The house was silent again, and I found myself rubbing the edge of Linda's old wedding band still on my finger. They wanted me to move to invest to start over. Maybe it was the right thing, but the urgency in their voices felt like something else, something I could not quite name yet. I turned off the lights and sat alone in the living room, the quiet pressing in. The magazines Jessica had left behind were stacked neatly on the coffee table, their glossy pages catching the glow of the lamp. I picked one up, flipped through the photos, and closed it quickly. The houses were beautiful, but they did not feel like mine. That night, as I lay awake, I thought again of Linda's last words. Live, but live smart. I was not sure what living smart meant in this moment, but I knew I had to be careful. The push in their voices, the eagerness in their eyes, it was too much. I promised myself I would listen, but I would not decide too quickly. Something told me I needed to take my time to look deeper before making a choice that could change everything. It was a Thursday morning when I first saw the listing that would change everything. I had been sipping coffee at the kitchen table, the quiet of the house weighing heavy, when I opened my laptop and scrolled through a local real estate site. My eyes landed on a colonial-style home in Maplewood, the kind of place that seemed to belong in an old photograph. White columns, a wide porch that wrapped around the front 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, and a garden tucked behind the house. The asking price was $420,000. I sat back in my chair staring at the pictures. The porch looked exactly like the one Linda used to talk about how she imagined herself sitting with a book while the evening breeze moved the curtains. The kitchen was bright with marble counters, the kind she once admired in a magazine. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something that was not grief. I called the realtor listed on the site, a woman named Hannah from Heritage Property Management. She answered with a brisk but friendly tone, and within an hour, she had arranged a showing for that same afternoon. When I arrived, the air was crisp, the sky pale gray. The house stood at the end of a quiet street, a maple tree still clinging to a few golden leaves in the yard. I walked up the porch steps slowly, my heart beating faster than it had in months. Inside, the hardwood floors creaked under my feet. The dining room chandelier caught the light just right, scattering little stars across the walls. I touched the banister of the staircase and could almost feel Linda's hand slipping into mine. Hannah walked me through each room, her heels clicking softly. The master bedroom overlooked the garden, and I pictured family dinners, grandchildren playing in the yard holidays where the house was filled with warmth instead of silence. It was more money than I had ever planned to spend, but the payout from Linda's life insurance could cover it with enough left for renovations. For the first time since she passed, I imagined a future that felt like more than just getting by. I told Hannah I wanted to move forward, but that I needed privacy. She nodded, assuring me everything could be handled discreetly. That night, I contacted a lawyer I trusted, an old friend of mine named Mr. Clark. He explained how to purchase the property through a family trust keeping my name from public view. It sounded complicated, but he assured me it was possible. I signed the papers within the week, my hands trembling not with doubt, but with anticipation. I decided not to tell David and Jessica. Maybe it was selfish, but something inside told me to hold this secret close. I wanted to give them a surprise, to one day hand over the keys and say, "This is for all of us." For now, it was mine alone, a piece of hope that I had carved out of grief. The weeks that followed were filled with decisions. I hired contractors to repaint the walls, refinish the old floors, and install new appliances. Every day I drove to Maplewood, spending hours walking through the rooms, watching the house transform. I chose colors. Linda would have loved deep greens for the study, a soft cream for the kitchen. The master bath was redone with new tile, the garden cleared and replanted. Standing in that house, I felt more alive than I had in months. The workers greeted me by name, asking for approval on little details, and I relished having something to say yes to. I pictured Emma running down the hallway, David helping me grill on the porch, Jessica arranging flowers in the dining room. It felt like the kind of gift Linda would have wanted me to give. Still, I told no one. At night I lay in my old bed, the silence pressing in. But now there was something to hold on to. I had a vision, a plan. It was a secret, but it was mine and it gave me strength. One evening in early December, as I locked up after checking on the progress, I stood in the driveway, staring at the glowing windows. The house was nearly ready. I imagined David's face when I showed him the way. His eyes would light up with surprise, the way Jessica would smile at the thought of more space for Emma. I drove back home through the quiet streets, the Christmas lights flickering on porches, the air sharp with winter. For the first time in a long time, I let myself believe in beginnings. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat for a moment in the car, the engine ticking as it cooled. I thought about how much I wanted to tell David, how badly I wanted to share the joy of what I was building. But then I remembered the urgency in Jessica's voice, the way she pressed me to think of legacy of investments. Something told me it was better to wait to hold this secret until the right moment. I turned off the car and stepped into the cold night, carrying the weight of both excitement and caution in equal measure, knowing that whatever lay ahead, the choice I had made, could not be undone. The next morning, I woke with the restless kind of energy I had not felt since before Linda got sick. I went through my usual routine, made coffee, read the paper, but every thought circled back to the house in Maplewood. It was almost ready, just a few finishing touches left, and I began to picture how I would reveal it to David and Jessica. I decided to test the waters casually at first. Over lunch with David that weekend, I steered the conversation toward family and the holidays. We met at a small diner we both liked on the edge of town, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and strong coffee. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed. I asked him how work was going. He sighed, stirring his coffee longer than necessary. "Business consulting is not what it used to be, Dad. Clients are cutting costs, contracts are shorter. It is stressful." I nodded, letting him talk. Then I asked about Jessica, about Emma. His face softened when he mentioned Emma's Christmas recital, but tension returned when Jessica's name came up. "She is anxious about space," he admitted. "Our apartment feels cramped. Emma needs her own room, and Jessica's brother might have to move in for a while. She has been pushing hard for us to start house hunting." I leaned back, letting his words settle. Jessica had been in his ear the same way she had been in mine. A bigger place, more space security, all words that could justify a grab for money that was not theirs. "So have you started looking?" I asked carefully. David nodded. "Jessica already has her eye on a property in Maplewood. It is more than we can afford, but she thinks with some help from you, we might be able to swing it." My chest tightened. Maplewood. I kept my voice calm, curious. What street? He pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos, and handed it to me. There on the screen was my house, the colonial with the white columns and wide porch, my house. The one I had poured my savings and Linda's insurance into. I studied the photo, forcing my hand not to tremble. "It is a beautiful place," I said slowly. "Do you think you can manage it?" "Not without you," he said quickly. "Jessica thinks maybe you could help us with the down payment. She keeps calling it an early inheritance." The words cut deep. Early inheritance. My life's work reduced to an advance on what they expected when I was gone. I smiled thinly, handed his phone back, and changed the subject. Inside, though, my mind was racing. Jessica had already targeted my house, the house she did not know I owned. That night I could not sleep. I paced the living room looking at the photos I had saved of the renovations, the receipts from the contractors. I thought about Jessica walking through those rooms as if they already belonged to her, making plans for furniture and paint colors. The next day, I drove to Maplewood and parked a few houses down, watching from my car. My breath fogged the windshield as I waited. Sure enough, an hour later, Jessica's SUV pulled into the driveway. She got out with a notebook in hand, phone pressed to her ear. She gestured at the porch, the windows, the yard, laughing at something the person on the other end said. Then she walked around back, pointing at the garden like she was already redesigning it. My stomach twisted as I watched. This was not curiosity. This was possession. She was treating it like her home. I stayed there for nearly 30 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. When she finally left, I started the engine but did not move. The anger that had been simmering for weeks rose up, hot and sharp. That evening, David called again. "Mom, Jessica and I have been thinking. If we move quickly, we can make an offer before someone else does. The realtor says cash would be best." Cash. They wanted me to liquidate everything to hand over control. I kept my voice steady. "Let me think it over." But when I hung up, I knew there was nothing to think about. They were circling, tightening the net. Jessica saw me as the key to her future, not as a father or grandfather, but as a bank account. The following week, I returned to the house to meet with the contractors one last time. The place gleamed, every detail complete. Fresh paint, polished floors, a new roof, security lights installed out back. It was perfect. I walked through the rooms in silence, touching the smooth edges of the counters, the railing on the stairs. In the master bedroom, I stood at the window looking out over the garden. My garden. My house. And yet, I could hear Jessica's voice in my head, already laying claim, already deciding where I would fit in. A small room down the hall, a place to tuck me away, while they enjoyed the master suite. I clenched my jaw and turned from the window. This was not just about a house. It was about control, about respect, about the way I had been quietly used for years without even realizing it. I locked up and stepped back into the cold, the winter air biting at my skin. The Christmas lights were starting to appear in the neighborhood, twinkling against the gray sky. Families were preparing for joy, but I was preparing for a different kind of battle. I drove home slowly, headlights cutting through the early dark, my thoughts heavy. It was clear now. If I did not act, if I let Jessica guide the next step, everything I had worked for would slip away. The decision was forming, hardening like ice in my chest. Something had to change, and I knew the moment to reveal the truth was coming sooner than I had planned. The call came the next morning while I was finishing my coffee. David's name flashed on the screen, and I almost let it go to voicemail. But something in my gut told me to answer. His voice was quick, almost too cheerful. "Mom, great news. The realtor says the house on Maplewood is still available, but we need to act fast. There's another family interested." I gripped the phone tighter, staring at the steam rising from my cup. "That house is expensive, David." How do you plan to manage it? He hesitated for a second before lowering his voice. Jessica and I talked it over. We think if you cover most of the cost up front, we can handle the smaller expenses over time. Think of it as an early inheritance, Mom. You'd be helping us secure our future while still being part of it. The words sank into me like stones. I heard Linda's voice in my head, gentle but firm, reminding me of all the times we had sacrificed to give David opportunities. And now he stood there asking me to give up everything for a dream that was already mine. I told him I needed time to think and hung up before he could press further. That afternoon, I drove back to the Maplewood house. The winter sky was pale and heavy, the air sharp against my face. I parked down the street, watching the house from a distance. My breath caught when I saw Jessica's SUV already in the driveway. She was outside with her brother, a tall man with a nervous look about him. They walked around the yard like they were sizing it up, pointing at the windows, the porch, the side gate. I stayed low in my seat, anger rising in my chest. She was giving him a tour, speaking animatedly as if she owned the place. They both laughed, and I watched her gesture toward the upstairs windows, no doubt talking about who would take which room. It was like a knife twisting. They were planning to move people in before I even had the chance to reveal anything. My hands clenched on the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. When they finally left, I drove up to the house, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The warmth of the new heating system hummed quietly, the scent of fresh paint still lingering. I walked through each room slowly, running my hand along the walls, trying to calm the storm inside me. In the master bedroom, I stood looking out at the garden, the same garden I had paid to replant. I remembered the way Jessica had once suggested I give up my house and downsize, how her smile had seemed caring, but her eyes too sharp, too calculating. Now it all fit together. My phone buzzed. A text from David. "Mom, Jessica says we should meet with a realtor tomorrow. Can you come?" I stared at the message, my pulse pounding in my ears. I typed back, "Let me check my schedule," then slipped the phone into my pocket. That evening, I called Mr. Clark, my lawyer. I told him everything, my voice tight with anger and shame. He listened carefully before speaking. "Robert, you need to protect yourself. Change the locks immediately. And consider installing security cameras. If Jessica already has access, you must assume she will come back." I agreed and hung up my chest heavy. The next day, I hired a locksmith to change every lock on the house. By nightfall, I had a new set of keys and a quiet reassurance that at least one step had been taken. The following morning, I called a security company to install cameras inside and out. It was expensive, but worth every cent. That afternoon, as I unpacked some boxes in the living room, my phone buzzed with a notification from the security app. Someone was at the front door. I opened the feed and froze. Jessica stood there, her coat buttoned tight against the cold, a key in her hand. She slid it into the lock, twisted, and frowned when it would not turn. She tried again and again, then stepped back, pulling out her phone. Her lips moved quickly, her free hand gesturing at the door. She walked to the side entrance, then the back, trying every door before returning to the front. Her face tightened with frustration as she tried the key one last time, then stomped back toward her car. I sat in the quiet house, staring at the screen, my anger icy and sharp. She had a key. She had been inside before. The phone rang, not even 30 minutes later. David's voice came over the line, tinged with forced concern. "Mom, Jessica noticed the locks might have been changed at that Maplewood house. She's worried there's been vandalism or something." I let the silence stretch until he started to stammer. "Why would Jessica be checking on a house another family is supposed to buy?" I asked finally, my voice calm but edged with steel. There was a pause too long. She thought she saw something wrong from the street. Maybe broken windows. She was just being cautious. My chest burned with the effort of holding back the truth. I could almost hear Linda whispering, urging me to stand firm. "Michael, how did Jessica get a key?" The silence this time was worse. I could picture him sitting there scrambling for an explanation that would not reveal the truth. "I saw her on the cameras," I said. "She tried every door. She had a key. How did she get it?" His breath caught, and for a moment I thought the line had gone dead. When he finally spoke, his voice was thin. "Mom, we need to talk about this in person." I hung up my hand steady for the first time in weeks. The lies had reached their peak. Now it was only a matter of time before the whole truth broke open. David showed up at my house that evening, his shoulders hunched as if he carried the weight of something he could not hold anymore. I let him in, watching his eyes dart around like a guilty child. He sat down heavily in the armchair across from me, his hands fidgeting with his phone. "Dad, this whole thing is a misunderstanding," he began. "Jessica just wanted to help. She thought she was easing your burden by stepping in." I folded my arms, waiting. "Help," I repeated. "By lying to the bank, by getting a key to a house that wasn't hers, by trying to move her brother in before I even had a chance to speak." His head dropped and he pressed his palms together as if in prayer. "She told the property managers she was your daughter-in-law and that you had asked her to check on the renovations. They believed her. That's how she got the key." My jaw tightened. "So she has been inside," I said slowly. He nodded, shame flickering across his face. "For weeks. She wanted to make sure everything was up to standard, that the contractors weren't cutting corners." I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. "David, I paid for that house. I oversaw every renovation. I chose every color, every fixture. She wasn't protecting me. She was claiming what didn't belong to her." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw a boy again, the one who once clutched my hand when he was scared. "Dad, Jessica was desperate. We're behind on rent. My business is struggling." She panicked. I wanted to reach for him, but anger held me still. And instead of asking me for help, she decided to trick me. His silence said everything. The room felt colder than the winter night outside. I stood and walked to the window, staring at the dark street. The truth had been bleeding out in pieces, but now it was undeniable. Jessica had not stumbled into temptation. She had built a plan brick by brick. I turned back to him. What was her next move? He hesitated, then swallowed hard. "She wanted to convince you to sign the house over as an early inheritance. Said it would save money on taxes, make everything easier down the line." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "Easier for her, you mean?" His face crumpled. "I didn't know how far she had gone, Dad. I swear." I believed him, but that didn't erase the fact that he had let her words shape his own thoughts, his own hopes. He had sat there and asked me for money because it was easier than telling her no. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, I said, "You need to understand something, David. That house is mine. I bought it with the money your mother left me. I intended to give it to you, to all of us, as a gift, but after what's happened, I can't trust either of you." His head snapped up, eyes wide. "You bought it." I nodded, my chest tight. 10 weeks ago. I've been renovating it ever since." The color drained from his face. For a moment he couldn't speak. Then he whispered, "Jessica's going to lose it." I didn't respond. Later that night, after David had gone, the phone rang. Jessica's number flashed, and against my better judgment, I answered. "Dorothy." Her voice was sharp, stripped of the sweetness she usually layered on. "You've made a mistake." The ice in her tone cut through me. "I made a mistake?" I asked. "You bought that house just to control us," she snapped. "You knew we wanted it, and you dangled it in front of us like some twisted game." I nearly laughed at the absurdity. I bought that house as a gift, I said. I wanted to surprise you, to give you something special. Prove it, she said quickly. Show me papers. Show me anything that says you plan to transfer it to David. Otherwise, this was about power. I could hear the calculation in her voice, the way she twisted reality to suit her. My grip on the phone tightened. You broke the law, Jessica. You lied to the bank. You impersonated me. You trespassed on property that wasn't yours. Her breath caught, but she recovered fast. Families do what they have to do. You're overreacting. I hung up. Sleep didn't come that night. I paced the halls, stopping often at the photo of Linda on the mantel. She had always seen through people quicker than I did. She would have told me to be careful, to trust my gut. By morning, my decision was clear. I called Mr. Clark again and laid everything out. He listened without interruption, then said, "Robert, she's committed identity theft and fraud. You need to decide if you want to press charges." I stared out the window at the frost clinging to the lawn. My son's marriage, my granddaughter's future, all balanced on this knife's edge. Not yet, I said. But I want everything documented. Every key, every visit, every lie. That evening, Jessica showed up at my front door unannounced. Her face was pale, her eyes ringed with shadows. She asked to speak privately. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I handled everything wrong. I stayed standing, arms crossed." "Why, Jessica? Why not just ask me for help?" Tears filled her eyes, but her words were steady. "Because you've already done so much for us. The down payment on our apartment, the car repairs, the Christmas gifts. I was ashamed to ask again." "Shame doesn't give you the right to steal," I said quietly. She flinched, then lowered her voice. "I thought if I could make it seem like your idea to help, you'd feel better about it. I didn't want you to resent me." I shook my head. "What you did isn't care. It's control." For a long time we sat in silence, the weight of her choices pressing down. Then she admitted something that chilled me deeper than the winter air outside. "I was going to suggest you transfer the deed to David to protect it from nursing home costs later. My uncle told me it was smart planning." My stomach turned cold. "So not only did you want me to fund your dream, you wanted me to sign away everything." She dropped her gaze, her voice barely audible. I didn't think of it like that. I believed her, but it didn't make her words less dangerous. I walked to the door and opened it. "It's time for you to go, Jessica." She looked up at me, her eyes shining with something between anger and fear. "This isn't over," she whispered. I closed the door behind her, my hands shaking only after the latch clicked into place. The house was quiet again, but the silence felt different now, heavier. I sat in my chair staring at the security feed still glowing on my phone. I knew she would not stop. She had crossed too many lines already. And the next time I might not be able to hold back. 2 weeks passed in a blur of phone calls, texts, and tension I could feel in my bones. David called almost every night, sometimes with Jessica beside him, sometimes alone, their voices shifting between guilt, pleading, and anger. I stopped answering half the time, but the messages piled up. They wanted meetings, discussions, chances to explain. I knew the real reason. They wanted me to fold. One morning just before Christmas, David showed up at my door holding a small box of cookies Emma had baked. His smile was weak, but I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table and he pushed the box toward me. "Emma wanted you to have these." I thanked him, then waited. His eyes flicked to the counter where the house papers sat in a neat stack. He cleared his throat. "Dad, Jessica and I talked again. She's scared. We can't afford the apartment much longer and she's pregnant." The words hit me harder than I expected. Pregnant. I looked at him closely. Is that true, David? He nodded. She just found out? A cold heaviness filled me. They thought this would soften me, and in a way it did. The thought of a grandchild stirred something tender. But I also knew Jessica would use that life as leverage. I leaned back in my chair. David, I will always care for you and for any child you bring into this world. But you and Jessica need to learn that fear and desperation don't excuse deceit. He looked down, his hands clenched. She thought it would make you happy, Dad. A bigger house, more family under one roof. I shook my head. What she wanted was control. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house, the one they still called the Maplewood property, and felt every detail I had chosen like armor. Linda's voice seemed to whisper from the walls, reminding me of strength I didn't think I had left. The next day, while I was unpacking books in the study, the security app pinged again. I tapped it, expecting maybe a delivery truck outside, but my stomach dropped. Jessica stood on the porch with her mother. Both of them were peering at the windows, pointing, whispering. Jessica held a folder in her hand. I turned the volume up, catching fragments through the camera's mic. Her mother asked, "Are you sure he will go through with it?" Jessica's voice was tight. "He will have to. I know how to push him." My chest tightened. She wasn't done. She was strategizing, bringing in reinforcements. I called Mr. Clark immediately. He listened as I described what I saw. "Robert, you need to consider filing a restraining order," he said firmly. "At least you'll have a legal ground to stop this constant intrusion." I agreed to meet him after the holidays, though I knew it couldn't wait much longer. That evening, the phone rang again, and against my better judgment, I answered. Jessica's voice was soft, but it carried steel underneath. "Robert, I heard you've been talking to lawyers." My throat went dry. How would she know? "You don't want this to get ugly," she continued. "Let's just settle this like family. Transfer the house now and everything will calm down." I almost laughed at the audacity. "Calm down," I repeated. "After everything you've done." Her voice sharpened. "If you push me, you'll regret it." I hung up before she could finish. My hands shook not from fear, but from rage. On Christmas Eve, I drove to David's place with Emma's present in the back seat. When he opened the door, Jessica stood behind him, her hand on her stomach. I stepped inside, greeted Emma, and handed her the wrapped box. She hugged me tight, her warmth cutting through the cold tension that hung between the adults. When Emma skipped off, Jessica moved closer, lowering her voice. "You're making a mistake dragging outsiders into this. Lawyers, paperwork, cameras. It's unnecessary." I looked her in the eye. "You tried to steal what was mine. You lied to my face. Don't stand here and talk about unnecessary." David shifted uncomfortably, but Jessica didn't flinch. "This isn't just about you," she said. "It's about family. About your granddaughter, my granddaughter," I corrected. "And she deserves to grow up knowing the difference between honesty and manipulation." The silence was heavy. David finally muttered, "Maybe we should just take a break tonight." I left shortly after walking into the cold night air. My breath curled like smoke in front of me, and I thought of Linda again. She would have hated seeing our family like this, fractured and bruised. But she would have told me to stand firm. When I got back to my house, I sat in the living room, staring at the Christmas tree I had decorated alone. The lights blinked softly and the house smelled faintly of pine and new wood. I realized then that Jessica would not stop until she either got what she wanted or was forced to face consequences. And David, caught in the middle, was too weak to stop her. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the decision pressing into me. The line had already been crossed, and the next move was mine to make. The morning after Christmas, I woke with a heaviness that refused to lift. The joy I should have felt from seeing Emma open her gift had been swallowed by the weight of Jessica's words and the look in David's eyes. I knew it was time to take action. I called Mr. Clark and told him I was ready to move forward. He suggested we meet the next day at his office downtown. When I arrived, the sky was gray and the air bitter cold. His office smelled faintly of old books and leather. He listened carefully as I described Jessica showing up again, bringing her mother and the threatening tone of her last phone call. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Robert, you have clear evidence of trespassing and attempted fraud. At minimum, we can prepare a restraining order and start documenting every incident formally." I nodded, though a part of me ached at the thought of dragging my son and granddaughter through legal battles. Still, I agreed. He drafted the paperwork, and I left his office with a folder under my arm and a new resolve in my chest. That evening, I drove to the Maplewood house. The contractors had left for the holidays, and the place was quiet. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air smelled of fresh paint and pine from the tree I had put up in the corner. I sat in the living room, staring at the lights, and whispered to myself, "This is mine. Linda, this is ours." The security cameras buzzed on my phone. A notification lit up, and when I tapped it, my blood ran cold. Jessica was back. She stood in the driveway with her brother and another man I didn't recognize. They were pointing toward the garage, the back entrance, whispering with a sense of purpose. I watched from the shadows of the living room as the front door handle rattled. The new lock held, but the sound still made my stomach twist. After a few minutes, they gave up walking around the house before finally leaving. I stayed there long after the headlights disappeared, my heart pounding. This wasn't just opportunism anymore. This was persistence. A plan. The next day, David called. His voice was strained, weary. "Mom, Jessica said you've been making things difficult. She feels like you're punishing her." "Punishing?" I repeated, my voice low. "She broke into my house. She lied to my bank. She paraded her family through a property she doesn't own. And I'm the one punishing her." He sighed heavily. "Maybe if you just gave her some reassurance, told her what your plans were, she'd back off." I nearly laughed at the naivety in his tone. "David, I don't owe Jessica reassurance. She owes me honesty." There was silence broken only by his quiet breath. Finally, he said, "I don't know how much longer I can balance this, Dad." "You're not meant to balance lies," I told him gently. "You're meant to stand against them." That night, I reviewed the security footage again. Watching Jessica's frustration as the locks resisted her key gave me a grim kind of comfort, but it also reminded me how far she was willing to go. On New Year's Eve, as snow began to fall, I drove once more to the house. I wanted to start the year inside it, to claim the place fully. I carried a bottle of Linda's favorite wine and a glass, set them on the counter, and sat quietly as midnight drew closer. My phone buzzed just after 10. Another notification from the cameras. I opened the feed and my chest went tight. Jessica was there again, this time with her mother and a realtor. They were walking through the yard, pointing at windows, making notes. I stayed silent, watching them circle like vultures. The realtor gestured toward the porch, and Jessica smiled like she already owned it. My hands shook, but I held myself still, my jaw clenched. They finally left close to 11, and I locked every door twice before sitting back down. The snow outside was falling heavier now, covering their footprints. As midnight approached, I raised the glass of wine, whispering Linda's name into the quiet. My heart was steady now, not just from anger, but from resolve. Jessica had crossed every line, and David had let her drag him too far. The clock struck 12. Fireworks echoed faintly in the distance, but the house was quiet, mine alone. I knew what I had to do next. I set the glass down, and reached for the folder Mr. Clark had given me. The papers felt heavy in my hand, but also like a shield. I whispered into the empty room. "It ends now, Linda. This year, it ends." The first morning of the new year, I woke to the sound of silence. The snow outside had blanketed the world, in white muting everything. I stood at the window with my coffee, watching the breath of my neighbor's chimneys drift into the cold air, and I felt an odd calm settle over me. The decision had been made, and that steadiness gave me strength I hadn't felt in months. I drove to Mr. Clark's office later that afternoon, the folder still tucked under my arm. He greeted me with his usual calm efficiency and slid fresh documents across the desk. "These are the petitions for a restraining order," he explained. "We will also file notices with the property management company and the county clerk to ensure there are no unauthorized attempts to transfer or encumber the property. Once these are processed, any further interference will be a criminal matter, not just a civil one." I signed my name slowly, deliberately, feeling each stroke of the pen like a shield locking into place. Clark looked me in the eye. "Robert, you've done the right thing. This protects you, and it sends a clear message." Leaving his office, I felt taller, like the weight pressing on my shoulders had shifted. But that lightness didn't last long. When I got home, my phone was already buzzing. 3 missed calls from David, 2 from Jessica. I ignored them, but later that evening, David showed up unannounced. He stood in my doorway, his face pale, his eyes tired. "Dad, what are you doing? Jessica says you're trying to cut us out completely." I stepped aside and let him in, closing the door against the bitter wind. "Sit down, David. We need to talk." He perched on the edge of the couch, his hands twisting together. "She's scared," he said. "She thinks you hate her." I stared at him, my voice steady. "This isn't about hate, it's about what she's done. She lied to the bank, she stole a key, she walked her family through my house like it was hers. And you let it happen." He dropped his head, unable to meet my eyes. "I didn't know how far she was going, Dad." I leaned forward. "Then you need to start knowing. Because if this continues, it won't just be me she's hurting. It will be you, Emma, that baby she's carrying." His head jerked up, shock flickering in his expression. "How did you know?" I sighed. "Jessica told me. She wanted me to feel guilty to bend, and maybe for a moment it worked, but not anymore." He looked stricken, torn between loyalty and shame. "I can't just walk away from her, Dad. She's my wife." I softened my tone, though the anger still burned beneath it. "I'm not asking you to walk away. I'm asking you to open your eyes." For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then he whispered, "What happens now?" I pulled the signed documents from the folder and set them on the coffee table. "What happens now is this. She steps 1 foot near that house again, and it becomes a criminal matter. You need to understand, David. I'm not bluffing." He stared at the papers, his shoulders slumping as the truth settled in. 2 days later, the first confrontation came. Jessica called me directly, her voice sharp with anger. "So you're dragging the courts into this. Do you realize what you're doing to your own family?" I kept my tone calm. "What I'm doing is protecting myself. You had every chance to be honest, Jessica. You chose lies." Her voice cracked like ice. "You'll regret this." I hung up my hands steady. That weekend, I decided to spend more time at the Maplewood house, moving in pieces of my life. Boxes of Linda's books, photo albums, small things that made it feel more like home. I set up a chair in the study and hung one of her quilts on the wall. Each little addition reminded me why I was fighting so hard. But peace never lasted. Late Saturday afternoon, as I unpacked dishes in the kitchen, the cameras sent another alert. Jessica again, this time alone. She stood in the driveway, staring at the house like it was slipping away from her fingers. She tried the front door, found it locked, and pulled out her phone. I watched her pace her free hand, gesturing wildly as she spoke to someone. Then she did something that made my stomach turn. She crouched near the flower bed and pulled a small box from her purse. She buried it in the snow-covered soil, her face tight with determination. I didn't move, didn't go outside, just watched as she finished and walked back to her car. Later, after she drove off, I stepped into the cold and walked to the flower bed. My boots crunched in the snow. I dug with my gloves until I felt the box. Pulling it out, I opened the lid. Inside were photos of the house printed from the realtor's site, a list of renovation costs, and notes in Jessica's handwriting about paint colors, furniture placement, even where her mother's room would be. I held the box in my hands, the icy wind cutting across my face, and felt fury rise in me again. This wasn't hope or desperation. This was obsession. Back inside, I set the box on the counter and stared at it for a long time. My lawyer's voice echoed in my mind. Document everything. I snapped photos of the contents, sent them to Mr. Clark, and locked the box in a drawer. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from resolve. That night, as I sat in the quiet of my new living room, the snow still falling outside, I realized something had shifted. The fight was no longer about keeping a house. It was about drawing a line in the sand. About teaching Jessica, and maybe even David, that there are consequences when you cross it. And as much as it tore at my heart, I knew there was no turning back. The days that followed were heavy with silence. David called once or twice, but I let the phone ring. Each time I heard his voice on the voicemail, torn and pleading, I felt the sting of loss. He wanted me to soften, to pretend Jessica's actions could be explained away, but I knew too much now. One evening, as I sat in the study of the Maplewood house, my phone buzzed again with a notification from the cameras. I opened the feed and saw Jessica's car parked across the street. She wasn't alone. A man in a suit stood with her, pointing at the house, flipping through papers on a clipboard. I leaned closer, heart pounding. She had brought a realtor again, or maybe an appraiser. They walked the perimeter of the house like they had every right to. I felt my throat tighten, anger mixing with something colder. She wasn't backing down. The next morning, I took the box of evidence I had collected and met Mr. Clark again. His brow furrowed as he read through Jessica's notes. "Robert, this shows intent. She's not just meddling. She's trying to establish a claim." I asked him what that meant. He explained that while she couldn't legally take the house, her persistence, if left unchecked, could create complications. At worst, she might try to tie me up in court with false claims of promises or inheritance. I felt my stomach sink. What do we do? He folded his hands. We file a cease and desist letter, serve her directly, and if she crosses the line again, we go to the police. Leaving his office, I felt steadier, but I also knew delivering that kind of letter would escalate everything. 2 nights later, the storm broke. David called after dinner, his voice tight. "Dad, Jessica got a letter from your lawyer. She's furious." I didn't answer. He pushed on. "She says you're humiliating her, making her look like a criminal." I finally spoke. "She doesn't need my help for that, David. She's done it herself." There was a pause long enough for me to hear him breathing. Then he whispered, "She's pregnant with your grandchild. Can't you at least try to keep peace for that?" I closed my eyes. David, peace built on lies isn't peace. It's a trap. He didn't respond. The line went dead. The next morning, I drove to the house early. Frost covered the grass, glittering under the pale sun. As I pulled into the driveway, my chest tightened. The flower bed where Jessica had buried that box had been disturbed. The soil was uneven, fresh footprints pressed into the frost. I rushed inside, my heart hammering. Nothing seemed touched at first. Then I noticed the faint scent of perfume in the hallway, something floral and sharp. My stomach clenched. She had been inside. I checked the cameras, scrolling back through the night. And there it was. Jessica slipping around the back using a flashlight, trying every window until she found the basement latch I hadn't thought to secure. She had crawled in. I felt fury rise like fire in my chest. Watching her on the screen moving through my rooms, like a thief, I gripped the counter to steady myself. She left an hour later, carrying nothing visible, but her face was set with satisfaction. I called Mr. Clark immediately. He didn't hesitate. "Robert, it's time to involve the police." By noon, I was sitting in the Maplewood police station, the footage playing on an officer's monitor, for he nodded grimly, taking notes. "This is breaking and entering. We'll file a report. If you want, we can press charges." The words felt heavy, like a line I had never wanted to cross. But I nodded. "Yes, do it." That night, David came storming into my house. His face was red, his voice shaking. "Dad, how could you call the police on her?" "She's my wife." I stood my ground. "She broke into my home, David." "She crossed the line." He slammed his fist on the table. "You're tearing this family apart." My voice rose without meaning to. "No, David. She is, and you're letting her." For the first time, he looked at me with something like fear. His voice dropped almost a whisper. "Maybe I don't know her as well as I thought." The room went still. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the door swinging open behind him. I stood there, my hands trembling, listening to the silence settle again. For the first time since Linda's death, I wasn't mourning. I was fighting. And I knew the fight had only just begun. The following week felt like walking a tightrope. Every time the phone rang, I half expected it to be the police with an update or David with another plea. The restraining order paperwork was moving forward, but Jessica was not the type to sit quietly and wait. One evening, as I was settling into the Maplewood house with a plate of reheated stew, the security app lit up again. My stomach clenched. When I tapped the feed, I saw Jessica standing at the edge of the driveway, bundled in a heavy coat, her breath clouding the night air. She wasn't alone this time. Her mother stood beside her, arms folded tight. They didn't approach the house. They just stood there, staring. I sat frozen in my chair, the spoon still in my hand. The sight of them, silent and unblinking, felt more threatening than any words. After several minutes, they turned and left, but the chill they left behind stayed long after. The next morning, I drove to the police station to check on the report. The officer at the desk recognized me immediately. "Mr. Harris, we're processing the case. If she violates the restraining order, once it's approved, we'll have grounds to arrest her." It was both comforting and heartbreaking to hear. Comfort because I was no longer standing alone. Heartbreaking because it had come to this. That afternoon, David showed up again. He looked worn, like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't bother with small talk. "Dad, Jessica says you're trying to ruin her life." I shook my head slowly. "No, David. She's ruining her own life." He dropped heavily into the chair across from me. "She's scared. She thinks you're building a case to take Emma away from us once the baby comes." I stared at him, stunned. "That's not what this is about. I would never take your daughter." His eyes searched mine, desperate for reassurance. "Then why are you doing this?" "Because she broke into my home." I said, my voice low but firm. "Because she lied, manipulated, and pushed too far. And if I let it slide, she would do it again." His shoulders sagged. "I don't know how to fix this, Dad." "You don't fix it by covering for her," I said. "You fix it by facing it. The words hung between us, heavy and sharp. Later that night, I sat in the study staring at old photographs of Linda. Her smile seemed to hold steady, even now, reminding me that strength could be quiet, that love sometimes meant drawing boundaries no one wanted. 2 days later, the knock on the door came just after dawn. When I opened it, Jessica stood there, her face pale, her hair pulled back hastily. For once, she wasn't smiling, wasn't trying to charm. She looked tired, almost desperate. I didn't invite her in, but she started talking anyway. "Robert, I need you to hear me." I crossed my arms, waiting. She took a shaky breath. "I know I crossed a line. I know I shouldn't have gone into the house. But you have to understand, we were drowning. Rent overdue bills piling up, David's work falling apart." I panicked. Her words came quickly tumbling out, but I heard no apology. Only justification. I kept my voice steady. "You didn't panic, Jessica. You planned. You lied to my bank, you lied to the property manager, you lied to David." That wasn't panic, that was strategy. Her eyes flashed, and for a second the mask slipped. She straightened, her voice hardening. "You think you're protecting yourself, but really, you're tearing your family apart." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Family doesn't steal from each other." For a long moment she just stared at me, her breathing quick and shallow. Then she turned and walked back to her car without another word. I stood at the doorway, long after she drove away, the cold air biting at my skin. That night, David called again. His voice was quieter, this time defeated. "Dad, I don't know what to do anymore. She won't let it go." I closed my eyes, the ache deep in my chest. "Then you need to decide if this is the life you want for your child." The line went silent, and for the first time I sensed he was starting to understand. I set the phone down and sat in the dim light of the living room. The house around me solid and quiet. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like someone standing his ground, waiting for the storm to break. The storm came sooner than I expected. 3 days into the new year, an officer knocked on my door to tell me Jessica had been served with a restraining order. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness wash over me. Relief that I was finally protected in writing, sadness that it had come to this point with my own family. That evening, David called again. His voice was quiet, almost broken. "She's furious, Dad. She says you betrayed us." I leaned against the counter, staring at the glow of the lamp on the table. "No, David, I protected myself, and I gave her every chance to do the right thing." He didn't argue. For once, he only said, "I need time to think." The days that followed were quieter. No more late-night calls, no more cars idling at the end of my driveway. For the first time in months, I could walk through my house without checking the windows every few minutes. I spent my mornings unpacking Linda's things, putting her quilts in the bedrooms, arranging her books on the shelves. The house was slowly becoming a home, not just a hiding place. Then one Sunday afternoon, David showed up again. He looked different this time, older somehow, as if the weight of everything had finally settled on him. He sat across from me and rubbed his hands together. "Dad." I moved out. The words hung in the air. "Out?" I asked softly. He nodded. She wouldn't stop. Even after the restraining order, even after everything she kept pushing. I couldn't keep pretending it was okay. I felt something shift inside me, a mixture of grief and pride. I reached across the table and put my hand on his. "You made the right choice, son." He lowered his head, his voice shaking. "I just want my kids to grow up different. I don't want Emma or the baby to think lying and manipulating are normal." For the first time in a long while, I felt hope. Weeks turned into months. Jessica fought bitterly at first, sending messages through her mother. But the law held firm. The restraining order stood, and eventually she stopped showing up. David filed for separation, and though it was painful, I saw a light return to his eyes. One evening in spring, I hosted my first real dinner at the Maplewood house. Neighbors came bringing casseroles and pies, filling the rooms with warmth and laughter. Emma sat at the table beside me, chattering about school and asking if she could help in the garden. I looked around at the house, the food, the people, and for the first time since Linda's passing, I felt something close to peace. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the porch. The garden lights glowed softly, and the air smelled of fresh soil. I thought of everything that had happened, all the lies, the betrayal, the pain, and I thought of how close I had come to losing not just a house, but my sense of self. Linda's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, proud and steady. "You did it. You stood your ground." I lifted the glass toward the night sky and let myself smile. Sometimes family isn't about blood. Sometimes it's about boundaries, about teaching people how to treat you, about protecting what matters most, even when it hurts. And sometimes standing up for yourself is the only way to keep love alive for the people who truly deserve it. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you or reminded you of your own experiences, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know where you are watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you can be here for the next story. Your support means more than you know.